You may begin. And is everybody where they need to be? Is this okay? That cool? All right. So let's talk a little bit. Did anybody, before I get going, did anybody have any question about the Dutch, New Netherlands, how and why it was overthrown? Remember that the Dutch were not happy under the iron-fisted Peter Stuyvesant, aka Peg-Leg Pete, the guy who levied heavy taxes and took away their autocratic autonomy in the colony. So it is renamed New York. Remember, New York is much larger than we think. It is from Manhattan out into western New York, down into Pennsylvania, New Jersey, down into the Delaware River Valley. So Charles II is going to divvy out those lands. Remember, a lot of people owed him money as a result of the restoration. So a way for him to pay those debts easily, he's going to provide land grants. So we know, as JD talked about, the Carolinas. We have the Carolinas that are going to be divided up among noblemen. We also see, after the New York colony is taken from the Dutch, or New Amsterdam, he renames it New York after his brother, the Duke of York, James II. Part of that colony will be given to proprietors, Berkeley and Carteret, who will sell out those tracts of land in what is now New Jersey, named for Jersey Island. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then another debt that's owed to Charles is by a wealthy backer who is the father of William Penn. A little bit about the Quakers before I get into that land grant. The Quakers got started around the end of the English Civil War. They are a Christian sect that divides itself from the Anglican Church of England. They're founded in England by George Scott. They were better known as the Religious Society of Friends. They got that name Quaker because they believed in receiving the Word of God and inner light, and they would sort of shake and quake, and that became the name that they got for that particular action that they performed when receiving this emotional inner light. They were considered dissenters in England. They were branded, they were persecuted, in some cases jailed and executed. Much like the Pilgrims, they are going to seek refuge in Holland. That doesn't make them too happy. They're going to wind up in New England in some cases and in the Middle Atlantic, but they're going to be persecuted in those areas as well. We talked a little bit about Quaker persecution that took place in New England, and they're looking for a place of their own. That is where William Penn comes into play. He was born an Anglican, his family was Anglican, and he becomes a converted Quaker. Basically, Penn is owed a massive debt because his father backed Charles II, and due to primogeniture, you would not only inherit land and inherit things, but you would also inherit debts owed to your family, and he will inherit this debt owed to his family, and Charles will pay that debt forward by providing Penn and the Quakers a large land grant in present-day Pennsylvania. It's not the way that you're geographically thinking. It's not from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes. The original colony was much smaller than that. So again, they're going to be able to come over and practice their religion freely. Some of the other reasons they were persecuted, they didn't believe in titles. They would present, they would introduce themselves or communicate with people with common these and thous. They wouldn't take oaths. They allowed for more opportunity and autonomy for women in their society. Obviously, the thing that got them in the most trouble was that they were pacifists, they refused to fight, and they were going against the established Church of England. Those were the two big issues that they had to grapple with. Once they get their land grant, Penn will name, well, basically the colony will be named in honor of Penn and his father, Pennsylvania, meaning Penn's Woods. A walking treaty will be established with the Lenape, Delaware, that we already took a look at a little while ago. We're going to look at it again here momentarily with Chief Tammany or Tammany of the Lenape. It's actually the Turtle clan of the Lenape. I know that sounds bizarre, but it's kind of like smaller tribes within the tribe. And it was actually the best advertised colony. Advertisements, pamphlets. Like, how many times have you gone on vacation and pulled a pamphlet and you're like, yeah, I want to go to Busch Gardens? And we all done that, right? Okay, so there was pamphlets that went around. How many people are familiar with what a broadside is? Do you know what that is? It's basically like a poster. Like, see posters that are advertising maybe a concert or a poster advertising a political campaign. Well, they had posters that were advertising their colony, just as maybe a ship captain would advertise the need for sailors on a ship. So here we have the Benjamin West painting, the Treaty of Penn with the Indians from 1772. It actually took West a couple of years to complete this painting. It started in 1771. And then there's William Penn. Looks familiar, doesn't it? What does it kind of look like? Yeah, it's like the dude on the Quaker Oats cylinder or can. All right. So keep in mind that when the Quakers arrived, there were thousands of squatters in Pennsylvania. What are squatters? Anybody know? Yeah.
People who live on land that's not theirs.
Right. That's it. Okay? And these people had already built dwellings. They couldn't have been in a better place than Pennsylvania because, we know that things didn't go so well for squatters in the Carolinas. Most squatters had an opportunity to buy land. Not all. Some of them kind of got stuck into a little bit of a feudal society. But the Quakers were much more liberal in handling and dealing with squatters. It wasn't always the case, especially the fact that there were debts owed to the Quakers, and they followed through with those issues. But it wasn't like they just wiped away all debts to squatters that were living on the land grant. Squatters were coming from Virginia, New England, New Amsterdam, the old New Sweden colonies in the Delaware River Valley. There were a little bit of everybody was already settling in the region. Not like large scale settlements, but a sort of, it's kind of like basically frontier settlers throughout river valleys like the Lehigh and the Delaware River Valley that had settled in and around Pennsylvania. So we talked about Chief Tammany and the Lenape or Tammany. He actually was a very not only powerful but well-respected, honorable, and virtuous chief. In fact, it's ironic that the New York powerhouse Tammany Hall, it's a political machine that starts in the 1840s and into the turn of the century, is given the name Tammany Hall after him for honor and virtue, because they were like they were the farthest thing from honor and virtue. We'll talk more about the Tammany Hall political machine next semester. So the early treatment with natives, especially the Delaware Lenape, was very peaceful. They lived among many Quakers. They had peaceful relationships, but do keep in mind there are some tribes that are not going to share that type of relationship with the Quakers. The Mohican, the Susquehanna, and other Algonquian tribes that are in the Susquehanna River Valley and the Delaware River Valley. So this is going to create bigger problems once the Quakers allow more people to come in, because they're really lenient on who's coming in to settle. Pretty much all religions, with the exception of Jews and Catholics, are moving in, and over time that changes. Most of your Jews are moving to New York. Most Catholics are moving to Maryland. But with this easy naturalization process, you start to see a little bit of rabble-rousing going on, especially in the Lehigh Valley, like more Scots-Irish, German settlers moving in. And as they start to battle with Native Americans, that peace with Native Americans is only going to last for a fixed period of time. And we're going to talk, not trying to pick on you, JD, but your research is very relevant, because we're going to see similar vigilante groups rise up in Pennsylvania as a result of battling with Native Americans, similar to that of the Carolina Regulator movement. They're going to institute only execution for murder and treason. Again, I talked about the ease for immigration and naturalization in the colony. They're not big fans of slavery, even though they do practice slavery early on. They're going to be some of the first to move away from slavery, and they'll be some of the earliest people involved in the abolitionist movement that we'll talk about later. They have a variety of classes, races, people of all kind, people of all religion. A Jesuit who was Jesuits that visited and other people that visited talked about the flexibility of the middle class in Philadelphia. So if you were an artisan and you wanted to try to make a life for yourself, or a merchant, and you were from low class or middle class background, Pennsylvania and Philadelphia may have been a place for you to settle. And this was pretty common. Penn, he did have a little bit of problem with his own settlers over time. He did support Charles II, and he supported James II. This actually led to him getting locked up for a time. He ultimately dies of a paralytic as a result of a paralytic stroke. But the colony will carry on and will remain a Quaker colony, even though they're allowing a number of others to come in. New Jersey and Delaware are both proprietary colonies, and what I mean by that is you can go buy land and settle it sort of as like a real estate venture. New Jersey got its name from Jersey Island, where Carteret and Berkeley were from. That island is in the English Channel, and Delaware is from the River Valley, in which, and obviously the Lenape, Delaware, also connected to what other Delaware we've learned about? Yeah, good job, Lord Delaware. Excellent, Lord Dale Award. Colonial Philadelphia, definitely one of the most well-planned colonial cities. It is one of the largest urban cities in colonial America. If we want to pinpoint urban cities in colonial America, there are only really four: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charlestown, which we know now as Charleston. Baltimore, Williamsburg, Norfolk, even Providence and Portsmouth, they were small. They were just small villages. They were, I guess you could call them urban villages, but they had more of a rural feel to them. These were actually hustle bustle city centers that focused on commercial trade. A little bit about the middle colonies and how Philadelphia kind of becomes like the middle colony way station. They are going to have fertile soil. They are going to be rich in grain agriculture. They're going to be rich in corn agriculture, and they're going to be rich for livestock agriculture as well. They become known as the breadbasket colonies. Delaware is really the main middle colony that's producing tobacco. They're not producing nearly as much as Maryland, Virginia, or North Carolina, but it is the tobacco. It's still a tobacco colony, and it is a slave-held colony and will ultimately become a slave state that we'll discuss later. A little bit about how they make their money. Agriculture, a lot of entrepreneurs, a growing middle class, number of different business ventures, shipbuilding, trade, fishing. It was a place to make a fortune. And one guy in particular that makes a fortune there is going to be Benjamin Franklin. He leaves Boston. He was from a very large family. He and his brother were working in a printing press. He was sort of like his brother's apprentice. They didn't really get along. And he decides to leave with a little bit of money in his pocket, a couple of loaves of bread, and winds up in Philadelphia, establishes his own printing press. It becomes wildly successful. In his late 20s and early 30s, he will develop and edit and also publish one of the largest circulated almanacs. And the only thing that really sold more copies than his almanac in the colonies was the Bible, and that is going to be Poor Richard's Almanac. It was first published in 1733, and that publication will run all the way through the American Revolution. We'll talk more about Poor Richard's Almanac when we get into lesson 4 and into the American Revolution. He is our Renaissance man in the American colonies. He's sort of like what we would consider our American Enlightenment philosopher. He was the inventor, bifocals, the odometer, the lightning rod. He's responsible for the colonial postal system. He was responsible for the first volunteer fire department in Philadelphia, established the first public library. He's sort of, we can actually make a link to Ben Franklin, because post-secondary schools, like basically beyond primary schools, that idea was sort of cultivated by Ben Franklin. So like preparatory collegiate schools he was sort of the brainchild of that movement. And he also helped establish the University of Pennsylvania. All right? Anybody know what their mascot is? An easy one to remember. We're talking about the Ivy League UPenn. We're not talking Penn State. We're not talking about Pitt. We're talking about UPenn. Anybody want to take a wild guess? It historically connects to the colony. The Quakers, that's right. Good job. They are the Quakers. I'm crazy about mascots. It always connects to our American history. So, not always, but a lot of the time. What we see in the Middle Atlantic is we see a colonial people who are surviving, they're thriving, they're living longer, and they're prospering in this era. This is a young Ben Franklin in 1748. We'll talk more about Ben Franklin as we move into the next 3 lessons. All right, makers of America, the English. The English are the largest number of settlers coming over in all of the colonies, from New England to Georgia. About 75% of the English coming over are indentured servants. I'm going to explain real quick what I mean by this. All right, we all already know what an indentured servant is, but basically this is how the process went. Let's say I decide that I'm going to sell myself into indentures, all right? And I sell myself into indentures, and Esther is in the business of purchasing indentured servants and getting them to the English colonies. So look, my contract, see this? It's indented, right? So Esther is going to own my indentures, all right? She's going to make her way across the Atlantic. And then Jacob is interested because he owns a farm, he needs the help, and he wants to buy my indentures. I'm not really well educated. I'm lower class or lower middle class. I didn't stand a chance in the primogeniture game. Therefore, my only opportunity is to come to the New World. So, Jacob now owns my indentures. When my service is up, hopefully by 7 years, if Jacob is a good owner, then he will hold true to my contract. He might be kind of shady though, all right? He knows that I'm illiterate, so he might put like an addendum on my contract, and if I break it, I might have years of service added to my contract. So I gotta pay attention to that. That was a problem that colonial indentured servants faced, right? When the time's up, thank you, sir. Hey, what's up?
Hey.
I'm gonna get my yeah. There you go. Good luck. All right. So once my indentures are up, I'm going to get my contract back. All right. Which, great. Now I'm free. All right. Now I want to change the scenario. This time, I'm upper middle class. I'm impacted by the primogeniture. I've got an education. I was educated in Essex or Cambridge or somewhere, and I'm pretty high born, but I'm low down on the list of my siblings. I'm low on the totem pole. There's not a chance that I'm going to be able to climb up to the top of the list. I'm not going to have any wealth inherited, any land. So I'm going to sell myself now to Esther because I have, even though I might have a little bit of money, I'm going to sell myself into indentures because I want to become a doctor, all right? And I need to become a doctor's apprentice, and my prospects are pretty good. So now we're going to sell the indentures, and now this time, Ben is a doctor in Colonial Virginia. He needs an apprentice. He's got a lot of work on his hands. So now I'm going to be under Ben's indentures, but my indentured contract's going to probably look different. How might it look different? He's a doctor. I want to be a doctor. I'm educated. How might my contract look different than it did with Jacob? Right. I can read, so my contract's probably going to be a little bit more ironclad, right? Another thing is that Ben is probably not going to really want to own me for a long fixed period of time. Why might that be the case? Why might Ben want me for a shorter period of time? Any ideas? He's a doctor in Colonial Virginia. Why might Ben not want me for necessarily 7 years? No. Yeah, he actually might want to hire me and bring me in to what we would consider like a practice, right? So I might actually end up getting a job with him. So that right there, that's like a legit apprenticeship. Whereas my life with Jacob might not be a legit apprenticeship, especially if I'm working on a tobacco plantation or if I'm even farther south working on a sugar plantation. So the life of the indentured servant could be starkly different. And I wanted to point out that you only have about a 60% chance of living, which is not all that great, because more indentured servants are in Jacob and I's scenario than in Ben and I's scenario. But the other thing about it too is you only have about a 25% chance of really seeing your freedom. And for that reason is that those contracts in so many cases were manipulated. Okay? Does that help make? Did you guys know that about indentured servants before? Good. Yeah? No? Maybe? All right, cool. All right, so remember, a lot of males without wives and females are going to be moving to the southern colonies and in the middle Atlantic, which is kind of wild in Colonial Virginia. In the first 100 years in Colonial Virginia, the number of men to women was like 5 or 6 men to 1 woman. All right? So this created some tension, and we're going to talk about those problems going into lesson 4. All right? Whereas in New England and in Pennsylvania, but especially New England, we see people more or less migrating in family units as opposed to just selling themselves into indentures, right? And a lot of these indentures, sometimes marriages were recognized, but a lot of indentured marriages were not recognized. It's the same problem with slave marriages that we'll talk about later. Look at that number of, is that it? Oh, well, I appreciate it. That is crazy. I mean, that's a significant number. This is why it's called the Great Puritan Migration. 11,000 Puritans coming over to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they bring that culture of Congregationalist religion, strong work ethic, and thrift. But they're obviously culturally and religiously different from those settling in the Middle Atlantic and those settling in the South. Here's the indentured servants on tobacco plantations. This is just sort of a quick review. Just give me a minute or two to look back at the Iroquois, who we've already talked about. Remember, they are a powerful confederated tribe in upstate New York. They were brought together by the spiritual leader Hiawatha. Their tribes are made up of their confederation is made up of the following tribes: the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca, and later after that, North Carolina Regulator Movement, the Tuscarora. Their main enemy were the Huron. They also vied with the French, English, and the Dutch for supremacy. Their main trade partner, though, was the English. They had a constitution on the wampum. They had one of the oldest and most solid constitutions in the colonial era. They created the game of lacrosse to train their warriors. Got some lacrosse players in the room, I'm pretty sure, right? Any lacrosse players? All right. The longhouse, remember, that's the way they lived. We're going to take a look at the longhouse dwelling in a second. Remember, it typically went through the mother's side. Remember, women held a great deal of power in the tribe. They elected tribal chiefs. The Mohawk were the middlemen for trade, notably with the English, and the Seneca were the fur suppliers through the Susquehanna River Valley and into the St. Lawrence Seaway. All right, so some of the rivals are the Huron, the Erie. They also had some conflict with the French. That will get a little bit better. They stay together during the French and Indian War and refuse to break apart, and they'll reluctantly get behind the English. But what's really going to break up their tribe is going to be the American Revolution. You are correct. They are. The Great Lakes, I mean, that whole region was battled between them and the Huron. Yeah, awesome. The Iroquois are going to be split apart, moved to reservations. They will start to live by the code and teachings of Handsome Lake. The tribes still live by those teachings today and live in the form of the Longhouse tradition and the Longhouse religion. This is the flag of the Iroquois Confederation, and that is what the Longhouse dwellings looked like, and you can see them in the palisaded fort, and that would have been the Iroquois Longhouse tradition.